Saw dudes, this video covers all the important parts of the recently released Season 21 Abilities Tuning Preview, which was released yesterday. I'll be going over all the changes really quickly so I don't waste your time. At the end, I'll discuss what to take away from this so that you can start crafting ASAP. Let's get started. Bungie went ahead and increased the fragment slot allotment for the following aspects from 1 to 2. For Hunters, Trapper's Ambush, Shatter Dive, and Gunpowder Gamble. For Titan, it will be Bastion Juggernaut, and for Warlock, it'll be Chaos Accelerant. All supers have increased PvE damage resistance by approximately 20%. Both versions of Golden Gun, as well as Arc Staff, received a 20% damage buff, and Spectral Blaze will have a 35% damage buff in PvE, and the heavy attack now weakens targets on hit. They also fixed an issue causing some right-hand Spectral Blaze attacks to fail to connect when attacking at maximum attack speed. Gathering Storm has direct impact damage versus players increased from 200 to 300, delayed lightning strike damage versus players increased from 300 to 500, lingering lightning tick damage versus players increased from 40 to 60, and now deals increased damage versus Will of Radiance and Word of Dawn. Fist of Havoc had its light attack cost reduced from 8.5 to 6%, heavy attack cost reduced from 18% to 12%, increased heavy attack PvE damage by 33%, and the heavy attack now blinds targets near the center of the slam area. Glacial Quake, Shiver Strike, Thrust Speed while on Super will be increased by 10%, and the increased light attack damage by 20%. Sentinel Shield, Hammer of Soul, and Burning Maul all have increased PvE damage by 10%. Burning Maul now creates a sunspot on cast when Soul Invictus is equipped, matching the behavior of Hammer of Soul, and the heavy attack Cyclone now applies Scorch over time. Nova Warp had its PvE damage increased by 15%. A fully charged attack now makes enemies volatile on hit. And Nova Bomb had its PvE damage increased by 20%, sorry. Storm Trance had its PvE damage increased by 25%. Damage ramp while attacking now occurs more quickly, over 3 seconds instead of 5. Landfall Detonation and Seekers now jolt targets. Chaos Reach had its PvE damage increased by 25%. Sustained damage on a single target now creates a jolting lightning strike at the target's location. Increased damage resistance versus players from 40% to 50%. And they increased the maximum strafe speed from 3.5 meters per second to 4.5 meters per second. They also adjusted the super camera angle to avoid the player's body blocking the view of targets. Winter's Wrath had its PvE damage increased by 10%, and the super camera was changed for Daybreak, similar to Chaos Reach. Hunter's Threaded Spike was buffed. They increased the projectile travel range before beginning to return to the player by 30%. Increased damage versus PvE combatants by around 55%, slightly reduced the speed of the dart as it returns to the player to make it easier to catch, and increased the energy gain for catching the dart based on the numbers of enemies hit. It now pierces Cabal Failing Shield and no longer prioritizes the catch action over the grapple melee if an enemy target is within the grapple melee range. For Titans, their Frenzied Blade was buffed. They decreased the cooldown based on how many melee charges the player has stored. At 0 charges, the cooldown will be reduced by 15%, and at 2 charges, the cooldown will be reduced by 30%. For Warlocks, their Arcane Needle was also buffed. They decreased the cooldown based on how many melee charges the player has stored. Just like Titans, at 0 charges, cooldown is reduced by 15%. At 2 charges, cooldown is reduced by 30%. They also increased the projectile speed based on the projectile's flight time. Initial velocity was increased to 40 meters per second, up from 30, and the final velocity was increased to 70 meters per second, up from 60, and they increased the projectile tracking strength by around 10%. Grapple has its base cooldown reduced from 105 seconds to 82 seconds, and reduced the minimum time between grapple activations from 2.5 seconds to 0.2 seconds. Threat of Generation was hit with a slight nerf. They reduced the energy generation provided by some damage over time mechanics, think Witherhoard, and they reduced energy generation provided by trace rifles by 36%. Hunter's Withering Blade has increased projectile tracking search range on bounce versus players by 20%, and increased maximum tracking strength by 12.5%. Titan's Shiver Strike, maximum thrust while in flight, was increased by 16%, and they also decreased maximum downward influence of gravity while in flight by 18%. Howl of the Storm has increased width of Freezing Cone versus players by 31%, and Warlock's Frost Pulse now provides 2 meters of additional melee lunge range after activation for 1.2 seconds. Titan Shoulder Charges were hit with a blanket nerf, with Seismic Strike, Shield Bash, and Hammer Strike now costing 15% melee energy on activation without a hit. Base cooldowns are now standardized though at 91 seconds, previously from 101 seconds to 114 seconds. Knockout got a PvP focus nerf, but a general PvE buff. The lunge range was reduced from 6.5 meters to 5.5 meters, and the uncharged melee PvE damage bonus was increased from 60% to 100%. Shield Throw's base impact damage was increased from 60 to 70, and has increased consistency of finding and adjusting initial trajectory toward a new target after a bounce. Throwing Hammer now adjusts its initial flight trajectory based on your aim assist target. Soul Invictus has increased damage dealt by sunspots to enemy players per tick from 17 to 22. Moving on to Hunters alone, Snare Bomb had increased PvE weekend duration on detonation from 4 seconds to 8 seconds. Proximity Explosive Knives was changed. Detonation damage versus players reduced from 105 to 90. Impact damage versus players increased from 14 to 20. Weighted Throwing Knife was also changed. On mouse and keyboard, they reduced the minimum tracking shape size by 25% and maximum tracking shape size by 10%. This shape grows over 0.5 seconds after the projectile is thrown. Lightweight Knife was also changed. Projectile speed increased from 30 meters per second to 40 meters per second, and the tracking shape size increased by 20%. A more interesting change, Gunpowder Gamble's cooldown was reduced from 12 seconds to 6 seconds. Finally, Warlocks. Incinerator Snap had issue fixed, preventing the secondary projectile arming shape from activating, so the total damage versus players was reduced from 150 to 135 to compensate. Ball Lightning has increased PvE damage by 30%, and reduces ping scalar on both primary and secondary detonations, so combatants are less likely to not be knocked out of the secondary strike area while the player is amplified. Chaos Accelerant was changed. Scatter Grenade has increased tracking consistency of charged Scatter Grenade submunitions and increased submunition arming duration. They also fixed a bug where some submunitions were impacting the ground on creation, in some situations resulting in an early detonation. Magnetic Grenade for a handheld supernova was also changed, and they increased the charge hold time from 3.2 seconds to 4.5 seconds for more flexibility. Lightning Surge was also changed, more like a bug fix. They fixed an issue allowing Lightning Surge to deal more instances of secondary strike damage than intended when near a wall. Now targets can take a maximum of 2 instances of damage from a single activation of the ability, one from the primary Lightning Strike around the player and one from the secondary Lightning Strike. Basically the bug gave big damage. Moving on to the subclass Verbs, Scorch has an increased stun time before stacks begin falling off from 1.5 to 2.3 seconds on players, increased stun time before stacks begin falling off from 3 seconds to 4.5 seconds on PvE combatants. Jolt got hit with a somewhat hefty nerf. They reduced base PvE damage by 15% and reduced an additional damage scalar versus major combatants in PvE by approximately 20%. And finally, Speed Booster saw some quality of life changes. Bonus Jump Acceleration Scalar reduced from 1.5 times to 1.25 times, so you won't jump as high. Now activates after sprinting after 2.5 seconds, down from 3 seconds, and now lingers while the player is not sprinting for 2 seconds, up from 1.5 seconds. They also fixed a bug where if the player was already sprinting and then became amplified, the Speed Booster would not be granted. There's a lot of buffs going around, as well as some good quality of life changes. With the alteration to fragment slots, and much more builds are going to be more flexible, especially for Hunters, Void Titans, and Arc Warlocks. Arc Warlocks in particular may be eating next season, and I will be working on a build for them. In general, I don't think the community should cry about the changes to Shoulder Charge. I understand it hurt the PvP scene a little bit, but it was necessary. The buffs going all around are great for game flexibility and player enjoyment, and should reward our time invested in our builds. That's everything. Thank you for watching. I hope you guys get to farm Guardian games. Have a good one.